Hey everyone, thanks for checking out one of our past Insta lives. We hope you enjoy the content, and if you do, we hope you'll follow us at Cake Decorating School on Insta and join in for our regular weekly lives.
Thanks for all the hearts, y'all. We're going to be talking about borders today, so I'm going to get this up here. So some basic ones like your shell, your rope, reverse shell, simple things like a star or a rosette, and even things like a bead and a dot. So I have a couple of different sheets that I'm going to work on. And I want to talk about these because a nice clean shell border is a thing of beauty, but they can be easy to kind of mess up and have them look a little wonky, right? So you're always trying to get that kind of nice curved over look, not flopped over, where it's kind of just expanding out and rolling over on itself. So we're going to talk about how to do that first. And hopefully you all will enjoy. So I'm going to set this aside, right? And I'll keep there up at the top. And I have some little sheets that I prepared. I'm just gonna hold this up so hopefully everyone can see. But when you're making it, right, if this is the surface that we're piping on, we're gonna hold our bag so it's kind of at a 45-degree angle in relation to the surface. So not straight up and down. You want the frosting to be able to flow out of the tip in this direction, right? And when we start, we're gonna hold it so the tip is just lightly touching that surface. And as we start to squeeze, we're gonna lift it up. So only a little bit, about quarter to half an inch. As you do this, you're still squeezing. So what's gonna happen is it'll force the frosting out and make it curl over on itself. So when we start to see that curl happening and we have this nice balloon rounded shape, then we're gonna take it and pull it down at an angle towards the surface. And that's gonna give us that nice tapered shell that gives us that nice appearance, right? So now I'm gonna put this down and make sure my frosting is coming out of my bag. Awesome. And we're gonna give this a try. So you notice I'm holding the bag in my hand, right? The bag is at a nice 45-degree angle in relation to the surface. And I'm gonna start with it touching, right? That way the frosting connects, lift out, still squeezing. You can see it rolls over. And once it's done that, I'm gonna pull it back down towards the surface, right? While I'm still squeezing. And that's gonna give us that nice tapered teardrop shape. And you can see the frosting really rolls over on itself, but it's not like a line that's folded over on itself. And I think that's the classic mistake sometimes people get to when they do these. I'll try and do one, even though it's a little hard. You get used to doing them properly, and it's hard to do them improperly. So sometimes people lift up too much, right? And then you get messy little shells, and I'm gonna try and manipulate that. So then you get more of like a folded over line instead of it kind of expanding and blossoming out like that and giving you that nice tapered teardrop shape, right? So the second important thing is you're gonna do these in a nice little line, and you're gonna use them to trim the bottom edge, maybe put them on the top of your cake. If it's a rectangle, it's nice to do them easy and straight. If you're on a curve, you will have to kind of follow the curve, but it's easier to work on a tray at first. So when you do your next one, you wanna start far enough back, right? So you want to leave just a little space in between your tail and where you start your next one so that it overlaps onto the one before, but doesn't, right, cover up all of that tapered loveliness at the back, right? So if you start them too close together, they end up not having the shape and the variety that you want, right? You can't really see that tapered pull anymore. So you always want to start a little behind the one before so that you can actually see the full teardrop shape of your shells, right? And once you get a hang of actually piping them, the trick, oops, sorry, try not to jiggle the phone, is to get them even. And I think this goes with any border, but it's developing a rhythm to your piping. So I literally count in my head, which is harder to do when I'm talking to you all, but if I'm doing it on an actual cake, I develop a little rhythm, a little beat. Like I'm doing a 1 where I'm squeezing and a 2 where I'm pulling. So it's 1, 2, 1, 2, right? And that rhythm helps us time our piping, which means we're squeezing out the same amount of frosting and you'll get a much more even effect for your shells, right? So if you find like you've mastered actually piping them, but they're coming out variable sizes, some are bigger, some are smaller, work on developing a little rhythm and make up whatever little silly song makes sense to you and kind of works with the timing. But if you can get it, then you'll get nice, even looking shells, right? Every single time. And you won't have to worry about the size as well. So I'd say the first thing to work on is the actual technique. And once you get that going, start working on things like the size and making them really, really consistent as you go around. Right. So gently try to put that to the side. And building on our shell, the next thing to talk about would be a reverse shell, right? And that is where we're going to curve the line in various directions. So it's the same kind of technique where you're starting out 45-degree angle, touching the surface. And as you squeeze and pull up a little bit, you're going to let it start to balloon. And then you're going to pull the bag almost as if you're doing a rosette and curl one way. And then you're going to go the opposite direction. So you can think about this as left and right, up and down, counterclockwise, clockwise. It's up to you. There's no real right or wrong terminology for this. You just have to go up, curl over to one direction, and then the next. And that gives you a really beautiful alternating pattern, right? And you can see the little spiral action going on those shells. And it's really pretty on the side of a cake, especially if you're doing something kind of nautical feeling, because it always has the look of kind of like little waves and little seashells, right? So that one is a reverse shell. So it's a nice kind of like step up from the shell. It's just a little more difficult, but not too crazy. So let's see. What's next? Probably star. So this is probably the easiest one that you can do. So if you're still working on your shells, but you want something pretty to finish off your cake, a star is a nice way to go. Oh, thanks for the hearts, y'all. Right? So for this one, we're going to hold the bag straight up and down in relation to the surface we're piping on, right? And we're just going to lift it up off the surface about 1/4 of an inch, depends on the size of the opening. And that way, the frosting will attach to the surface and balloon out. And once you're finished, you stop piping and pull up, right? And that gives you a nice, fat, fluffy star, right? It's beautiful and perfect. If you're too close to the surface, you might notice that it looks like separate streams of frosting and there's a void in the middle. If you're too high up, right, then the line will have trouble connecting. So I'm going to try and do bad ones, right? You see, hold it too high up and it tried to make itself a rosette, right? Too close and I damaged it while I'm pulling it away. So those are kind of classic things. So I try to take a little bit of a Goldilocks and the Three Bears approach to things when I'm working on piping techniques, right? When I do something like this, I remind myself, you're too close, pull it up a little more. When I get stuff where it's uncontrolled and I can't, you know, really determine where the frosting is going, so too high up. So as you're going and you're piping stars and you're practicing, remind yourself, too close, too far away from the surface, and you'll start to get more consistent results, right? So if you want to, then the easiest way to make a border is just to line your stars up. And if you're nice and consistent and you're counting in your head, you'll get nice, even-sized stars that are really beautiful, right? Very similar in size, similar in height, thickness, right? And that's a beautiful way to finish a cake. And really what it comes down to is if you're clean in that presentation, they all look neat, they all look the same. Even a simple thing like a star border can be really, really beautiful. Right. Let's see. So next thing to talk about would probably be rosettes. So if you feel like your stars are going really well, a great way to expand on them is by doing a rosette. So a rosette starts with the same star. We're up off the surface just 1/4 inch. We squeeze a little star. If we imagine that our star is kind of like the face of a clock, I'm going to pull mine over to 9 o'clock, circle around, and when I get to 6, I start to taper off my pressure so that when I pull away, I get a nice, fluffy, puffy, perfect little spiral, right? Oh, thank you for the hearts. And then it's easy to just go ahead and line them up, right?
Is that just a star tip?
It's just the same star tip. I've been using a 21 tip the whole time. So it's one of those things where you can get a lot of use out of your star tips. And the 21 is really good for doing borders because it's big enough that it'll cover any imperfections of the bottom, but not so big that you're using tons of frosting, or it's really heavy, and not so small that you might still see some of your little, maybe slightly imperfect edges at the bottom of your cake, right?
So you mean all of this with just the same tip?
Yes, it's all just the same tip.
Oh my God.
I know, you can get so much fun out of one tip, right? And you can do this with any star tip. For finishing the sides of cakes, the 21 is probably my most popular go-to, right? So those are rosettes. And probably key things that happen sometimes, instead of drawing around the outside of that star, people will kind of go on top. They end up being too puffy and more like the top of a cupcake, like a swirl for a birthday, or pulling the tip back to the center, and then you get a little peak in the middle. So those are things to work on with that, right? I will reload my bag and talk about dots. So I'm gonna change my tip, right? And I just picked a couple of tips that I kind of know are really common. Everybody has in most beginning kind of like sets and stuff like that. So they're all easy ways to finish the bottom of your cake. Right,
The star tip, can you show that again on camera?
Sure, right? So I'm actually going to take it off the bag so it'll be really easy. So this is my 21. It has lots of different tines, right? You can see that. It's just a Wilton, but most of the brands like a Tico and the other ones that are common on the market, the 21 is always the same one. It's just a nice size. It's kind of comparable in opening size to your 12, which is actually what I'm changing to right now. So the 12 is just a plain opening, right? So it's just a plain round tip. It's a similar size to that 21, just without the little tines, so you don't get the little ridges, right? So we're gonna do just little dots. So you can use this to do pearls, right? Think you can change the tip up, do a bunch of different sizes, kind of stack them up on the side of your cake. And it's a really nice way to finish it, right? So same thing where we're going straight up and down with our bag. We're gonna lift it up off the surface about 1/4 to 1/2 inch. Oh, sorry, it's really about 1/4 inch. Let that frosting balloon into place, stop, right? So I'm not squeezing, and then I just gently swirl the tip around and rotate it off to the side. That gives you a beautiful mounded dot, right? The thing with dots, and I even find myself doing this after all these years, is that usually what people end up doing is they squeeze and then they just pull straight up. And you can see what you get then is a tiny little Hershey's Kiss, right? So it takes a little extra time, a little extra control, but if you swirl that tip around at the end, it'll shave that little peak off for you, and you'll get a really, really smooth, beautiful presentation. And if you string them together, you end up with a beautiful border, right? Oh, sorry, keep knocking the camera, right? And if the dots are a little, one thing you can do is an alternate form of the shell with the plain tip, but in this case, we're gonna stack them really close together, right? So same thing, 45-degree angle, right? Hold the tip against the surface, lift up, squeeze, and pull, right? And instead of starting back here behind the point of the first one, I'm gonna start right on it so that when I squeeze and pull, it nests them together and gives you a look like a beautiful little string of pearls, right? So by nesting them together, it makes them look connected and they start to look like little beads. So it's just a slightly different way to do a shell border that gives you a nice little variation. So if you've been doing shells and you're kind of sick of them, it's an easy way to practice your shells, right? But get a nice kind of smoother, sleeker look to them. Ooh, and this one is fun. So I'm gonna change back to my 21 tip and I'm gonna talk about a rope border. And I've actually seen this a lot lately on Pinterest, people using the kind of rope border technique in some cases to cover entire cakes. And it gives it a nice twisted braided look. And it's something you can build on to actually do kind of complex piped braids. So with this, we are going to take it and we're gonna start, and we're just gonna pipe a line above the surface, and then we're gonna do a little tail on it where we're scraping against the surface. And then we're gonna start our second line, right? Brought another color. Underneath the first, kind of right up next to it. And we're gonna follow the same shape and go like that. And then that way, we can go back and continue the first one and go over again. So you see it ends up looking like a twisted piece of rope because we have this kind of continuous undulating under-over motion that we're creating by basically piping two different threads kind of continuously in pieces. And I don't know if that sounded like gobbledygook or if it actually made sense to everybody, but hopefully it'll make more sense when I start piping, right? So I'm gonna start touching the surface, just pull my bag up, right? And I'm just piping, right, a nice little curve, right? And it's about an inch long, and you can see there's a nice little space now. I'm gonna nest the bag right in there so that when I start piping, my line will start there, and I'm gonna pull it up and over top of this line in the same motion. Right, so I'm going to start right here, follow the same motion, pipe over the tail of the first line, and create a tail, right? And so now, when I start my third one, I'm going to connect to this little tail, start piping, and pull over the tail of the next one. And that's going to give it that kind of braided, spiraled rope effect, right? So I start on the tail of my first curve and pipe over the tail of the second one. And then you just keep going, right? And I would say the thing that gets people the most is they're afraid to make their tails long enough. And if you don't have that to pipe over, you don't get that spiraled, puffy, twisted effect to it, right? And you kind of lose the effect of being a twisted piece of rope. All right, so just always connect to the tail of the one before you just did, and just keep going, right? And I've done more elaborate ones where they're more kind of like twisted Celtic knots and all sorts of fun stuff where you can kind of expound on this and you get your separate streams of frosting going and you create a nice, lovely pattern. But this is a good basic rope and it's a good one to practice, and it helps kind of with your spatial skills and some other stuff, but also your control. And it's really pretty and it looks lovely on the sides of cakes. Right. And then I think the last one has two parts, and I'm going to use a number 104 tip. And we're gonna do a ruffle. So this is a petal tip. That's another cloud. And if we imagine that this right here is kind of the cake, right? We're gonna pipe a ruffle along this edge and make a nice little border, say on the bottom of our cake board. if we're doing something cute and pastel pink and frilly. And we want to take the fat end of this 104 tip and put it so that it's not just against the surface of the board, but also against the edge of the cake, right? This might be a little hard to do, but I'm going to leave it kind of flat against the surface with just the skinny end up. And as I move along and I'm piping, I'm just kind of rocking that skinny end up and down, and it'll make nice ruffled curves, right? And I'll show you that. So you get a nice little ruffle then at the bottom, right? It's beautiful. Sometimes I just do 2 layers of ruffles and leave it at that, but you can also do a ruffle and shell or bead combo. So for that purpose, I pulled out one of my smaller star tips.
Can you show the 104 before you switch?
Yeah, sure. So the 104 tip, right? So it's just a nice standard petal tip. It comes in most little beginner kits and sets. And also, so does the 18. So it's a star tip, it has less points, and it has a slightly smaller opening. So the other thing that you can do is you can kind of make combination borders, right? So then on the back edge, you can do a little shell border. And this is also something that people do in combination to make pipe swags. So you can make more complicated borders by combining the different techniques with each other, right? So that was a nice way to finish.